Nier is a very special project, one that only comes around once in a while. A story that weaves its characters and world together so inextricably that you almost can't tell where one begins and the other ends. Themes that make you care and think about the ramifications of your actions. A game that is truly honest about its characters and story, but also about its creator and his opinions. Nier feels very personal, so realistic and true to the ideas of the man that made it that it almost feels like a piece of him. But it also plays with structure, warping and twisting the idea of how a game's story is delivered to create something entirely new. In my opinion, this is where the series really begins to hit its stride, and where the genius of Yoko Taro really starts to shine through. The game lacks in certain areas, combat can be repetitive, there is quite a bit of unnecessary grind, and the effort required to see the entirety of the tale can be tedious. But a project like this makes you see past all that, and not really worry about the flaws. This isn't to say that they aren't there, but when you look back on your playthrough, you often won't even think of them. This is because you'll be so enamored with the things that you experienced, the things you felt, the things you didn't feel, and those complaints will be lost in your memory. I cannot stress enough that playing Nier will be an experience that you will never forget. It is both a perfect game and an imperfect game all at once. It is one of my favorite experiences playing a video game and will not disappoint. Its story is unrelenting, thrilling, and something that most video games lack, in that it challenges the player, not through gameplay and difficult combat, but in theme and narrative. Today we're going to be taking a look at Nier. We'll be talking about gameplay, mechanics, and everything in between. If you haven't seen my previous videos on the first 3 games in the Drakengard series, it would make sense to go watch those now. Those games connect to these tangentially, and they do technically exist in the same universe. There are many references to those games in Nier, and you'll understand this game better having the knowledge of those. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as it really helps me out and ensures that I can keep making videos like this in the future. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by subscribing to the Patreon, where I upload early access to my videos, scattered text post updates, and longer versions of my full series retrospectives. You can also follow me on Twitch, where I play games that I'm not currently reviewing. Spoilers for Nier. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to talk about Nier. Nier actually began development shortly after Drakengard 2. Yoko Taro had begun working on an idea for a third game in the series. Takamasa Shiba and Kaguya both didn't want to develop another game for the PlayStation 2, when another new console was just around the corner. Working around this, Taro began coming up with an idea for a spin-off game, which ended up being Nier. The game was originally designed with heavy RPG mechanics. During production, producer Yosuke Saito wanted to shift development to a more action-oriented game. Saito had worked as producer on the original Drakengard games, but Taro didn't agree with this, and mostly ignored his requests, keeping the RPG elements. Nier was developed with a relatively small team at Kaguya, and it took around 3 years to complete the project. Taro took an unorthodox approach to storytelling with this entry. He liked to write the story starting from the end of an emotional arc and working his way backwards. He found that designing the game's story around emotional peaks and then working to find the reasons those emotional peaks have impact worked better for him. He also wanted the story to have a different structure than most RPGs out there. He felt that a lot of game stories were too predictable. Because of this, he wanted to show different sides of the same story, giving the audience something unexpected. Taro's focus was again on the ruthlessness of killing and finding the morality in there. He was actually heavily inspired by the 9/11 terrorist attacks when creating the story for Nier. Throughout development, Square Enix had determined that Western audiences would not identify with the younger protagonist in Nier. Because of this, Kaguya had to develop 2 versions of the game, one with a younger protagonist that aged over the course of the story, and the other with an older protagonist. The music for Nier was composed by Monica, with Keiichi Okabe directing the soundtrack. Okabe had worked on the music for many different games at this point, including some of the early Tekken entries. Kakeru Ishihama, Kaigo Hoashi, and Takafumi Nishimura all assisted on the soundtrack. Okabe was given great freedom over the project and was actually allowed to develop most of the songs separate from the game. The soundtrack was designed to have a sadness across the entire thing, even during the more action-based songs. Emmy Evans did a lot of the vocals for the soundtrack. Evans didn't have a ton of experience working on games at this point, only really having provided cello for a game called Time Hollow on the Nintendo DS. The team wanted Evans to write her own lyrics in a new type of future language. Evans wrote the songs in many different languages and then tried to imagine what those languages would sound like after drifting for 1,000 years. Nier Replicant, the Japanese version of the game, was released on April 22nd, 2010 for the PlayStation 3. Nier Gestalt, the Western version of the game, was released in the EU on April 23rd, 2010, and in the United States on April 27th, 2010 for the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. A few notes before we get into things. The first is about the version of the game that I played. As I said before, there were two versions of Nier released. Nier Replicant in Japan, which featured a young boy protagonist trying to cure his sister's illness, and Nier Gestalt in the West, which featured a much more matured man trying to cure his daughter's illness. I actually remember Nier being released in the West, and I have a specific memory of an advertisement for Nier in Game Informer, which I can't find to this day. This was just a mystery image of the main character that was released by Square Enix to tease their new game, but I remember fawning over it because it looked so interesting to me. For this review, I played the Replicant version of the game. I specifically played the remake of Replicant that was released in 2021 called Nier Replicant version 1.22474487139. The reason I chose to play Replicant for this review is just because it honestly works better than Gestalt. The two games are very similar and have very little difference outside of the change in protagonists, but this change actually has a cascading effect, which causes the story to have a completely different impact. We'll get into this issue later and talk about the specific details of why Replicant tells a much better story. I chose to play the remake of Replicant because it's honestly just a better version of the game. It features improved graphics, a re-recorded and arranged soundtrack, upgraded gameplay, and many additional pieces of story which flesh out the characters more and bridge the gap between this game and its sequel. The second note is on the structure of this review. Because this is a Yoko Taro game, we know what we're in store for when it comes to endings. Nier is no different in that multiple playthroughs will provide us different endings and different playthroughs that will give us different views of the story that we're playing. Because of this, I will first talk about the game and its first playthrough, going in depth on gameplay, characters, world, and everything else we'll see our first time around. At the end, we'll then venture back to talk about the other endings and playthroughs that the game provides. Nier begins in the summer of 2053, in a city with modern architecture, something unfamiliar to us in the Drakengard games previous. The buildings are broken down, dilapidated, almost post-apocalyptic. You'll also note that it doesn't look very summery here, as the structures are covered in fresh fallen snow. Inside a nearby building, a boy is falling asleep, and a nearby book is beckoning him to take the power that he's offering him. Shades begin to attack the building, and we get our first tutorial for the game. The boy's sister is nearby, and she begins coughing. She's wrought with sickness, overcome by some mystery disease. The sickness does not make her bitter, though. She is scared and innocent in this. The boy ventures out to find something to eat, warning his sister Yona to not touch the book beside her. Outside, the boy is overcome by the shades and is forced to turn to the book for more power. This book becomes our ally and a source of magic. We then get another tutorial on how to use the rest of the systems at our combat disposal. While the boy was gone, his sister found a cookie that they split. She begins coughing once again and drops the cookie. She begins to succumb to her illness as black words spread across her skin. The boy begs for help, screaming into the void for someone, anyone, to help. But this is not where our story takes place. Our tale begins 1,412 years later in a small village centered around another boy and another girl. These two are in a similar predicament. The boy is taking care of his sister, as she is sick with a mystery illness as well. The main character in Nier doesn't technically have a canon name. We are allowed to choose our character's name at the beginning of the game, and I chose Sun. but for the purposes of this review, I will be referring to him as Nier, or our protagonist. Most of the community around the game calls him Nier. Yoko Taro wanted him to be an unnamed protagonist so that he could effectively be anyone, but it seems that his wishes weren't the same as the production team's because the character is referred to as Nier on some of the game's sites. Because of that, I'll just be calling him Nier when it makes sense. Nier has to leave to go make money and get food for the two to eat. He is the primary breadwinner for the pair since they don't have parents to take care of them. The world of Nier can be pretty harsh, and these two children have been left alone to fend for themselves. Since Yona is ill, Nier then becomes the de facto provider for the household. Yona wants to go with him, but of course he won't allow this as she is too sick to leave her bed. He tells her to go get some rest and we head out into the world. Nearby our protagonist's home is a library. This is where Popola makes her home. She is one half of a set of twins that have served as surrogate parents for Yona and Nier. The two help them out in any way they can and have helped to raise the two since they were young. Clearly they still live on their own, but the twins are very close to our protagonist. He confides in them and looks to them for emotional support. Popola has a request from someone in town. They want us to get some mutton for them in the northern plains. Popola also wants us to grab some medicine for her. She gives us more than enough money to cover the cost of the medicine, clearly showing that she takes care of the kids. Popola believes in the spirit of community, and most of the village does as well. They want to see Yona get better, and they'll help in any way that they can. On our way out, we find Yona searching through the library. She's looking for books that could tell her how to cure her sickness. Nier tells her that if she gets rest, she'll get better, so she has to get back home, and she believes him. The world that we see now, though visually different from the world we saw in the prologue, isn't that much different in state. Plague has run rampant, monsters called shades roam the lands, and people say that the world is dying. This is a bleak outlook, but our protagonist has made it his goal to help his sister get better, to ensure that they both survive. He doesn't have another choice. Out in the northern plains, we have to take out some sheep to get the mutton that we were requested, and defeat some shades in the process. Shades being this close to the village is not a common occurrence. This is an oddity for this world, a change to the status quo, a symptom of something to come. We head back to the shopkeep, delivering the goods and getting Popola her herbs. She thanks us and we then head back to see Yona. Yona is incredibly excited to see us every time we walk through the door. Nier is Yona's favorite person in the world. He's the only family that she has left. She cares for him deeply, but he's also an incredible excitement, a change in her daily life. She has to sit inside 24/7. There is no respite from the boredom of the four walls that she's confined to. She says that she's tried to read books, but she read all of them. Hearing her brother talk about the world outside gives her some escape, a life that she could live someday if she gets better. The feelings of sadness are clear here. This girl is an innocent, and a bright, hopeful, and cheery one at that. She seems to have done no wrong, yet she is caught up in an illness that she can't yet defeat. Nier tells her of a legendary flower called the Lunar Tear. This flower is incredibly rare and will bring massive riches to the one who finds it. Yona asks if it could even cure her illness, and with the money they gain from the Lunar Tear, they could buy any medicine they could think of. The next day, our protagonist heads out on another day of running errands. Popola has another job for us, to head out to a nearby bridge that's being repaired. The crew was attacked by shades. There isn't much known about the shades that roam the world. Most know that they attack humans nearby and like to stay out of the sun as it damages them. But that day it was overcast and the crew was caught off guard. We have to rescue an injured carpenter who is still stuck out by the bridge. We take down some larger shades, learning some more about the combat system, which we'll go over shortly. When we get back, Popola tells Nier that Yona was asking her about the outside world. When we get back to the house, we find that Yona is gone, and we can probably tell where this is going. Apparently, Popola told Yona that lunar tears can be found outside the gates at the Lost Shrine nearby the village. Yona went looking for these lunar tears, and we can find evidence of this at the gates of the village. We can head out the eastern gate and head towards the Lost Shrine. This is a massive structure standing alone in the center of a canyon. A large bridge connects it to the rest of the world. We can make our way through the tower, heading up the stairs and taking some side rooms to access what looks like ramshackle ladders that take you up to the top. Shades have infested this place, attacking us as we make our way through the structure. Once we reach the top, we find Yona, unconscious on an altar, guarded by two massive statues. There's a small book in the center that seems to be emanating some sort of barrier. We can free this book, who calls himself Grimoire Weiss. Weiss has a very large ego. He knows the power he holds, and he isn't afraid to tell us about the gravity of those abilities. He expects to be treated as a being that can take down kingdoms, and doesn't settle for anything less. Because of the desperation of the situation, Nier decides to join forces with this book, and use his powers to help out his sister. I'm sure you can see the parallels here between the Nier-Weiss team-up and Chaim and Angelus. Weiss will become a father-like figure to Nier throughout the tale, though. He serves as a strict shadow, always watching over the actions of our protagonist. He tries to guide this young man in the way that he feels best. He tries to use his influence to shape the person that he will become. He now has both the mothers in the village back at home and his father at his side. With this, we get the powers of Weiss and have access to some of the magical attacks that we could do in the prologue of the game. This is probably the best time to talk about the combat of Nier. Nier is somewhere in the middle of an action game and an RPG. You might even call it an action RPG. The game's combat, though, is pretty simple to start. We can attack with a variety of melee weapons, either delivering a regular attack or a heavy attack by pressing square and triangle respectively. This is about as simple as it gets, and is what we'll do for most of the game. Slashing at enemies feels alright in the beginning and gets slightly better as the game goes, but the biggest critique I have about it is that it's very simple. There just really isn't a lot to do here. There is a good amount of variety provided through the weapons in the game, changing combos or attack styles, but this won't become very prevalent until about halfway through the story. Different weapons have their own style of attack and also their own damage ratings. These can be upgraded through a mechanic that's introduced later, so we won't talk about that just yet. Each weapon does have its own weight to it, which should theoretically affect its speed and heftiness, but there really isn't much of a difference at all. This was more of an issue in the original version of the game, but with the overhauled combat system, there really isn't a point. Weiss will allow us to cast many different spells or verses. These verses are gained throughout the story and range from shooting heavy damage bolts at enemies to shooting light damage balls to summoning spears from the ground. There is a good amount of variety here, and we can choose to do many different things with the system. We can also equip words, 2 per item, that will increase different stats. They can be equipped on weapons to increase damage or speed, equipped on verses, even our guard or roll. These are collected throughout the game from various enemies and types, but this is where the problems come in. Nier is very easy, way too incredibly easy. And you know it's a problem if I'm saying it's easy, because I'm about as average in skill as it possibly gets at video games. There just really isn't any reason to ever upgrade your weapons or ever switch out your spells. This was the second time that I played through Nier Replicant, getting all of the endings. The first time I played through the game, I tried everything out, all of the different weapons, upgrading things to make fights easier, testing out new spells to see how they turned out, but this time I went through the entire game without upgrading a single weapon or really ever changing my spells. I just wanted to see if I could do it, and let me tell you, it was not a challenge at all. There is also damage reduction on bosses when there's still dialogue left for them or your party to let out. This is another change made from the original game and is honestly a really good one. In the original Nier, you could actually skip past dialogue and boss phases. This is not good because the game is very easy and a lot of incredibly important and emotionally impactful dialogue is delivered while in combat. Now, we can't really skip those phases like before, so we're made to watch those scenes. I say this all with the caveat that I was playing the game on normal difficulty. You can make the game harder if you really want, but the base difficulty really is way too easy. There really just isn't a lot of challenge to be had here. There's also the fact that the magic bar really isn't useful. When you spend magic by using spells, it just immediately charges itself back up, so there's really no point for it being there at all. That being said, I can't say that the system itself isn't well polished or fun. There definitely could have been a larger amount of variety here to keep people interested, but it's still not bad. There's definitely nothing egregious here, and there isn't anything super impressive either. But if you compare it to the previous Drakengard games, then it's absolutely stunning. There are many things that will be introduced to the combat system throughout the game, as Nier really likes to drip feed us mechanics and systems, but we'll get to those as they come. As we fight the small shades and try to break down the barrier between us and Yona, Weiss tells us that his memory has seemed to fail. He doesn't remember much about why he is an all-powerful being, just that he is. He begins to regain some of his lost powers by defeating the enemies that we contend with. Then the two statues come to life, and we have our first boss fight. We have to manage both of these enemies at once, but they make it easy on us by one going into defense mode while we attack the other one. We get the Dark Lance attack during this battle, which allows us to fire a stronger, more damaging lance that takes a bit more magic to use. We end up killing one of the armored statues, which greatly angers the other. We take that one out as well and wake up Yona. The siblings apologize to each other as the shrine begins to crumble around them. The group heads out and the front entrance is blocked behind them. Yona feels like a failure. She couldn't get the lunar tear she wanted. She just wanted to help. Seeing her brother try so hard to cure her disease has caused her to feel like a burden on him. Nier feels bad about this as well. He just wants his sister to be safe and is doing everything he can to make sure she isn't hurt. The black scrawl begins to appear on her skin, a manifestation of the sickness that she carries. Nier and Vice's conversation tells us more about the disease. It appeared on Yona a month ago, and the black scrawl is fatal. There is no known cure for it as of yet. We head to talk to Devila, Popola's twin. She's heard of Grimoire Vice before. He's known as the White Book, and he's in the Song of the Ancients, a classic ballad that tells the story of a black book that begins to spread disease across the land. The White Book shows up and saves the world. She says that Popola could have some more information on the subject, so we seek out her guidance. She too recognizes Vice, who is overjoyed that someone finally appreciates his power. Popola tells us of a story, one of Grimoire Noir taking over the world, bringing destruction. Grimoire Vice, the White Book, will bring his sealed verses and destroy Grimoire Noir, removing the evil from the world. The sealed verses that Vice is supposed to bring are some sort of magic, the spells that we can cast using him. Nier is excited at this prospect. Maybe the sealed verses could help Yona. Popola thinks this is just a legend, but Nier is ready to kill every shade they can so that they might be able to gather the sealed verses. She tells us to go speak to the chief of the Eyrie, a neighboring village in the northern plains. This is the point in the game where side quests become available. Here we can take on requests from other villagers and complete tasks for them to gain gold, items, or weapons. Now, these are, for the most part, a weak point of the game. This isn't to say that there aren't good side quests in Nier, it's just that there are far too many. Half of the side quests are fetch quests that send you to the other side of the map, which takes forever, just to grab a material and then return it for a small reward. A few of the quests do have genuinely interesting stories, though, that tie into the overall theme of the game without spoiling it or shoving it into your face too much. If the total amount of quests wasn't overly bloated, then these would actually be a highlight of the game. The good news is they aren't all really necessary. There are definitely some that you'll want to do for extra gold to buy weapons, but we definitely don't need to do every single one. I know I'm not the only one that feels this way because while I was researching the Drakengard/Nier timeline for these videos, I stumbled upon this flowchart. Someone thought it was an issue enough to make a flowchart for reference, so it's gotta be pretty bad. For now, most of the stuff is pretty simple. Get mutton, find chicken eggs, and the like. There is a quest we get pretty early on to defeat a large boar in the northern plains. This is incredibly useful because we will get access to a boar that we can ride when outside of town. This makes travel quite a bit faster in certain areas, which is very helpful for obvious reasons. When we get to the Eyrie, we immediately notice its very strange layout. The Eyrie is not a traditional town. Its homes are built on platforms that jut out of the side of nearby rocks. Wooden floors hang above a near bottomless canyon. The citizens shroud themselves in small steel boxes, which keep them from the outside world. They are afraid of people that don't call the Eyrie their home, afraid of the shades that roam outside, afraid of most everything, really. The shades have made their way into this village as well, and we have to contend with them as we make our way to the chief. He also has holed himself up in his home. He doesn't want to speak with us and tells Nier to kick rocks. As we head out of the village, our protagonist spots a shining crown of flowers sitting in a small hovel just outside of town. It's a ring of lunar tears, but before we can grab them, a scantily clad woman shows up. Nier almost thinks that she's a shade because of the shadows around her hands. We then have to fight her. She's quick and puts up a decent battle unless we can knock her down. This will open her up for damage. She summons some sort of magic around her and begins to fight again. Once we defeat her, a massive shade appears over the crest of the mountain above. Like most bosses in Nier, this one is pretty easy. We have to attack the Shade's legs while it stomps on the ground. These stomps cause shockwaves to release, and we have to time our jumps or dodges to avoid taking damage. The Shade will spit more shades out of its mouth that we have to attack. Most larger enemies or bosses will have timers on them once we deal a certain amount of damage. We have to defeat these timers before they run out to progress the battle. Towards the end of the fight, the Shade will spit out massive waves of magic at us. We attack its head to take its sealed verse and end the fight, causing the Shade to attack once more, but Kaine saves us from sure death. She keeps saying that this Shade is hers to deal with. She has some sort of qualm with it. When the fight is over, she fades into unconsciousness, and the symbols on her skin disappear. Vice claims that she's possessed by a Shade, somewhere in between human and beast. She's not very appreciative of our help. She does tell us her name, though, Kaine. She's vulgar and crude, but she tells us that it won't be good for us if we stay with her. She tells us to stay away from the Shade that escaped us, and the two head out. When Popola hears that our protagonist thinks his weapons are too weak, she tells him that he can find 2 brothers in the junk heap who can upgrade our equipment for a price. She says we'll need around 1,000 gold, which we can get by taking jobs at the tavern. Devila happens to be there playing music for the small crowd. This is really just a way to convince us to do more side quests, grabbing medicinal herbs for people, returning orders that weren't delivered. You know the drill. Classic RPG side quest stuff. Eventually, we head to the junk heap. The 2 brothers that we heard of before are running a small shop at the entrance. Jacob owns the shop, and his brother, Gideon, helps him out. The 2 scour the junk heap, a rumored derelict military base for supplies. Their mother has been gone for days looking for supplies. The brothers need materials, and we need weapon upgrades, so we enter into a deal. If we get them 3 titanium alloys from inside, they'll upgrade our weapons. So, of course, we head inside. The dilapidated walls of the junk heap hold more than just scrap. They house rogue robots that seem dead set on taking us out. These enemies either attack with a close-range lightning bolt or long-range blasts. They also have flying variations and stationary turrets that will fire at us. Each of these enemies will drop some form of junk, scrap, or useful material. The junk heap is an incredibly valuable place for farming materials, either for upgrading weapons or completing quests. The place is pretty large, and clearing out the first floor will give us what we need to take back to the brothers. Jacob upgrades our first weapon for free. This unlocks the weapon upgrading system for Nier. Here we can provide materials in exchange for another level on our weapon. This will increase the damage output of the weapons. Like I said before though, this is mostly unnecessary, especially on normal mode. The game is just simply too easy to require anything like this. The materials needed to upgrade weapons are also just so much that it's an incredible grind to get what we need. It's therefore too costly and not necessary enough for us to need it. I will say that upgrading the weapons does provide more information from the weapon stories system, small stories that each weapon carries. This is something we'll talk about a lot more in depth once covering the supplementary material on the series. Jacob is insistent that their mother will be back, but Nier and Vice decide to venture inside to find the woman. Jacob gives us access to the elevator inside so that we can access the lower levels of the facility. Once we reach the lower levels, we encounter a massive robot that serves as our next boss battle. Here we have to shoot the hands of the machine. These hands will shoot out lasers at us. This attack is very simple to dodge, and just attacking with our dark blast will take the hands down easily. The machine will summon tons of robots to fight us and then begin its attacks with missiles. We can then throw bombs into its mouth to damage it. Once done 3 times, the beast goes down. Arriving in the next room, we find the 2 brothers' mother. She was with a man with a good collection of cash and clothes. It seems like she was leaving her children to be with her lover, but her tale didn't end very well. The game lets us decide what to tell her children, whether we decide to tell them the truth or not. This doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. It won't affect anything in our playthrough. It's not meant as a branch to split off pathways for different experiences on the end of the user. It's meant to reflect the user itself. It's meant to show us who we are and who we want to be in this world. It's also meant to reflect the world onto us, to show us how bleak things have truly become. When Gideon learns of his mother's fate, he runs away from the news. Jacob had already known about her lover and has made peace with it. He's just happy that his mother was with the one that she loved at the end. He forgives easily, ready to let things go at the end. This is in stark contrast to his brother. He has to be strong for him, hold up in the face of tragedy, a reflection of the relationship between Nier and Yona. When we arrive back in the village, Yona is very sick. She's in pain and needs help. Our protagonist responds in the only way he knows how, to head out and grab some medicine. Yona can't help but worry about him, though. We seek out Popola for help. She says finding a shaman fish might assist in relieving some of her pain. These fish are located in seafront, so we have to head out through the southern gate to make our way there. This town, just like others, has a distinct design reflecting the environment that it was built in. It takes much from its name in that it is in front of the sea. It's a trading village that has a lot of opportunity for purchase and sale. It's also clearly abundant in fish. Its most prominent structure is the lighthouse that stands at shore's edge, guarding the waters and the town itself. When we arrive, we can talk to the local fishermen who will teach us how to fish. This is a mini-game in Nier that will allow us to catch wildlife from many different waters across the world. Using bait, we can attract different kinds of fish, and near the end game, this will become the best source of gold if we need it. We can level up our fishing by completing the Fisherman's Gambit quest line, which has a large number of parts. Each quest sees us catching a specific type and amount of fish for the local fishermen. These can be quite difficult depending on the game. The task itself is usually pretty simple though. Cast our line, wait for a bite, and then reel it in. And honestly, any project with a fishing minigame in it gets automatic points in my book. Once we get the shaman fish, we head back towards town, but an old woman stops us. She's very rude and an impolite lady, but she says that her mail hasn't arrived yet. She needs someone to go pick it up, and because of Nier's good-natured self, we take on this task. We find out that the postman has a leg injury and hasn't been able to deliver the mail on time. We can deliver the lighthouse lady's letter and even read it to realize that her impatience was because she was waiting on a letter from her lover. He is stranded, taken on by an illness in a foreign land. We bring the letter to her and she rewards us for our troubles. We eventually bring the shaman fish back to Yona and she seems to be feeling a bit better. She's even given a pet name to Vice, Vicey. She wants to make stew for us and asks us to track down the ingredients. This is actually a side quest, but I think it's important to point out here because of Yona's character. It's very easy in games for the reliant, technically useless character to feel like a burden, and like I said before, this is even how Yona herself feels, but she never really feels like this to the player. This is probably due in part to her apologetic nature. Taro is very good at crafting these characters, ones that we are sympathetic to, but also we don't feel like we're forced to take care of. The game makes us want to take care of Yona, not feel like we have to. This is important because it creates a very specific distinction. We are not taking care of Yona because the game creates an objective forcing us to do this before we move on. We are doing it because we feel that we are Nier. We are the character that is taking care of Yona. This is because of both Nier's optimism and bright disposition in the face of bleak adversity, as well as Yona's steadfast nature. She believes there will be a cure, and so does Nier. Both of these characters know that she will get better, and that we're going to make it happen. But the player knows there's an underlying chance that this may not happen. Because of all these elements combined together, we feel for these characters. We are partly aware of the tragic tale that is taking place before our very eyes, and we want to help to make that tale less tragic, as much as we can. We don't view Yona as a burden, we view her as our sister. I should also note here that each loading screen normally contains letters from Yona's diary. Different entries may mention us and how she wishes we would be home spending time with her. They may also detail different events, such as Devila and Popola visiting her. These are also sometimes replaced by gray pages that mention other events, completely different and separate from Yona's inner thoughts, but no less important to the secret story going on underneath. When Yona inevitably does make a meal for Nier, it's not great. It's clear she isn't great at cooking, but the point is that she tried. When we talk to Popola, she tells Nier that the mayor of Seafront has spotted a horde of shades in the area. Once we head there, we're confronted with the shade from before, the one that Kaine was very adamant was off limits. We fight the beasts throughout the entirety of the area, jumping across platforms and moving the battle to different locations across the floating town. Eventually, Kaine is mesmerized by a voice that she hears, one of her grandmother. She quickly realizes that this doesn't quite sound like the grandma that she knew. We defeat the beast and Kaine falls into an unconsciousness. She wonders if she can rest now, but she's pulled back to life by Nier.
You're going to live, Kaine!
Live. What for?
What?
I had my revenge, and now it's over.
Oh, now, see here, this is rich.
Weiss?
We help you in some mad quest for vengeance, and now you think to bid us adieu? How can a fighter so skilled be cursed with such a thick head? A true warrior would fight. They would give all in the service of their friends.
Friends?
That's right. He's right. Kaine, we're friends now.
See here, that was hardly the point.
Okay, then what is the point?
She decides to pledge her swords to us, with no other place to put them. Kaine knows a king living in a city nearby. He's been trying to find a cure for the Black Scrawl for a while, and his people may have found something. As we head into town, Kaine decides not to enter into any of the nearby cities with us. She doesn't think that she would be welcome. We head through our village and over to the neighboring kingdom of Facade, the place that Kaine believes may have had an end to the Black Scrawl. Once we arrive, the guards don't allow us to enter until they see that Kaine is with us. Facade is a desert city built in an unorthodox way with many walkways and levels across a small area. Flowing sand rivers run throughout the town that the citizens use to travel across its uneven landscape. As we'll see soon, the city has also a pretty strict form of government. The people that live in Facade have thousands of rules they must follow and adhere to. These mostly get in the way of daily life, obstructing the citizens from living normally. New rules are developed all the time, forcing new laws on the people. The people of the city also speak in a foreign tongue, one not known to our adventurers. Kaine tells us that she saved a child from a pack of wolves a while back. The girl happened to live in Facade, and since then the people have always accepted her. When we journey to the king's palace, we can't get in because we're not sure how to talk to the guards. On our way back, we see a girl who has fallen, and we help her up. Her name is Fira, and she can't speak. Because she uses hand signals to talk, Weiss can understand her communications. She takes us on a tour of the town, showing us the shops and explaining some of the strict rules of Facade. At the end of the tour, she sees Kaine, the person that saved her. The guards rush to tell us that the prince has gone missing in the barren temple nearby. Their rules forbid them from entering the temple because they aren't nobility, but the rules also state that they must look for the prince right away. Because of this contradiction, Nier offers to go look for them. Fira guides us to the temple through a nearby never-ending sandstorm. Inside, the temple is broken up into a variety of different rooms. Each room has separate rules, mirroring the city of Facade. We must complete the challenges in these rooms while adhering to the rules. In certain places, we can't jump, or run, or use magic. As we begin to complete these rooms, we see the prince, who is captured by one of the temple boxes and taken further into the fortress. Kaine is also kidnapped in a similar way. Once we reach the lowest part of the temple, we encounter a new boss. This is a monster that is formed from the boxes defending the place. We mostly use ranged attacks to defeat this enemy. We can attack the pink cubes when they're lit up and slowly disassemble the creature. Eventually, it takes a more humanoid-type shape, though, and Kaine joins back into the fight. We eventually take the beast down, and the prince has found his mask that he was looking for. The king of Facade recently fell to his illness, the Black Scrawl. The prince was looking for the royal mask so that he could take his father's place and become the ruler of Facade. The prince tells us that Facade owes us a great debt. Nier tells him to create a Rule 0 that allows the people of the city to vote to change a rule if they don't like it. The prince gives us a sword as a gift, and before we leave, we ask him about the Black Scrawl. He tells us that he never found a cure for his father's disease. We promise to return once again soon. With this, we head back to Popola, who gives us a letter she received from the Forest of Myth. The text trails off into repeating the word dream halfway through the writing. At this point, there was a side quest available for the Lighthouse Lady. This was probably one of my favorite side quests in the game, mostly because it spans a couple different sections and carries a heavier weight than some of the other ones. It also happens to tie into the theme of the game. The postman ends up contacting us to deliver more mail to the lighthouse lady. At first, we think this is just another dumb delivery quest. We take the mail to the lighthouse lady, and it's another letter from her lover. He is still ill and cannot come to see her. All she wants is to look upon him once again. She decides to leave Seafront and stop caring for the lighthouse, but the postman can't let that happen. They don't have anyone else that can take care of the building, so she has to stay. Eventually, it's revealed that her lover has been dead for many years. The letters that the woman has been receiving were a fabrication made by the postmen. They did this because they didn't want to break the woman's heart, and she did so much for the town by caring for the building that they decided to put in the work to keep her dream alive, even if it was a farce. We then get the option to either tell her the truth or lie to her. I always decided to tell the truth in situations like this because it reveals more about the characters. In this case, the lighthouse lady is thankful. She had suspicions anyways, but she respects the people of the town for caring for her enough to keep up the lie. She requests that we tell the postman that she doesn't know about the ruse, and I obliged. This is a theme that runs through the roots of Nier, like an aged tree, permeating the soil and earth that surround it. When we start this quest, we think it's insane that the postman would lie to the old woman like that. She's been living a lie all this time, but once we deliver her the truth, she makes us see the other side of things, better than we could have if we talked to the postman himself. Seeing the other perspective is something that comes up quite often in this game, and it's something we'll get into heavily later in the tale. But no one shows us the other side like Nier. Once we arrive at the incredibly small village in the Forest of Myth, it is quiet. When we find the mayor, he tells us to beware of the words. It seems that he's under some sort of spell. Suddenly, the gameplay of Nier changes. We are no longer battling monsters with swords and magic, but solving puzzles through text. This reflects the contagious words that have infected the village. This is the Death Dream, and it has taken hold of the entire place. We solve a few very simple riddles and relieve the mayor of his death dream, but he says something peculiar, that he saw a version of Nier that was not himself. We end up heading into the other villagers' dreams as well, pulling them from their slumber. In one is a location-based puzzle where we have to keep track of the direction we're going and choose new ways from a list of cardinal directions. We save the woman from a great castle as the place collapses behind us. In the other dream, we encounter a lost city of art and a puzzle of statues that are mostly made up of liars. We have to figure out the simple riddle of which statue is telling the truth. Once we do this, the village is freed from the death dream and we can head out. I really do like this section, and it's such a refreshing surprise as we're getting deeper into the game. Nier is never afraid to switch up its gameplay style, its structure, its formula, or even its view. As you can tell, the game already employs a clever use of camera angles to show us the important parts of a scene. In later sections, we will even take an isometric view to deliver a different perspective on the battle. The game is never afraid to switch things up and try out something new. This is something I really respect with a game, and it shows that the team either wanted to create a variety in gameplay or that they were trying to get around other limitations. Popola tells us that a new canal is being worked on, but the man that's supposed to be running it has gone missing. We find him in Seafront, but he's worried because he can't find his wife. He tells us that she has a matching red bag, and we find a similar bag on a shade nearby. We go to deliver the news to him, but his wife arrives. This couple is known in the town for their arguing, so much so that they have become a spectacle in the village. One of these arguments starts in front of us because the man ate one of the woman's apples. We then get put in the middle of their argument. They eventually make up, and this allows the canal project to be underway. We visit Yona because she wants us to do a favor for her. Nier is shocked to find out that she has a pen pal that she's been writing to, a boy that lives in a mansion nearby. He's apparently sick and in trouble, so we have to go help him. We arrive at this mansion with big wrought iron gates out front. When we enter, the world goes dark. The color is sapped from our vision. There's a butler out front that guides us into his house. We begin exploring the place and come back to find Kaine gone. Heading further into the building, we can find various keys that allow us entry into otherwise locked doors. In one of these rooms, we meet Emil, the boy that calls this place his home. He wears a mask over his eyes, but can still tell who's coming from the sound of their footsteps.
Then I suppose I should tell you about my friend Weiss.
I only heard one set of footsteps.
Grimoire Weiss does not strut about like a common land mammal.
He has to wear the mask because anyone he looks at will turn to stone. He doesn't know anything about the letters that Yona has been receiving. He gives us a map and we head further into the building. We see many troubling sights along the way, making this place seem even creepier than it was before. When we meet the butler, he tells us that he has been sending letters to Yona. He originally messaged us because he wanted to help Emil and get our assistance with it, but Yona was the one that responded. The butler was only trying to help Emil get his sight back, some way to stop him from having to wear the mask. Apparently the cure to Emil's condition is in the manor, and the butler wants us to seek it out. Emil comes with us as we defeat the shades deeper within. Inside the library, we have to fight a flying book. We simply have to attack it and avoid its flipping pages. When it summons a big shield around it, we avoid its rolls and break its shield to get damage on the boss. During the fight, Emil feels incredibly bad that we're helping him. He wants us to leave and let him handle it because he doesn't want us to die for him. When the book is defeated, we find a research report on petrification. The key to the document is written in a code, though. The butler decides he is going to deconstruct the cipher no matter what. Before we leave the manor, Kaine talks to Emil. She tells him to not be ashamed of his eyes. They are a part of him.
Your eyes are not a sin. Don't ever be ashamed of them. They're a vital part of you. Do you understand?
She recognizes something in the child, something of herself, and decides to let down her standoffish demeanor to give him some words of encouragement. She says that she has found purpose even after she found her revenge, a reason to keep going on, to live. She whispers something in Emil's ear, something we aren't privy to. We head out back to the village and we get a long hanging cutscene over the area. This reflection on our home, the place that we've called home for most of the game, will have its reasons in a moment. It is the calm before the storm. One last look at the place as it was in the before. Nier lays Yona down to bed in their home. She says that she doesn't want her brother to hate her because of her disease. She again feels like a burden on the ones that care for her. We head to get some medicine from Popola, and she wants some vapor moss in return. As we head out, we see Emil limping through the southern gate. He delivers a warning, and Nier takes him back to the library. He tells us to get out of the village. At that moment, the shades begin to attack. Outside, a massive shade has begun to run rampant in the village. We have a massive boss battle here across the entire town. We have to attack its arms as it slams its fists toward us. We can sever its limbs, but it just regenerates too quickly. It moves across the open area and starts heading towards the library. Every time we deal damage to it, it just seems to keep coming back. We finally put an end to the beast before it reaches the library. Inside, we defeat the shades that are attacking the building, and a larger one shows up. This tentacle shade requires us to attack each of its limbs and then its head. It's very strong, but Nier manages to push the shade into the lower room of the library, and Kaine holds it off inside. Just then, our protagonist is stabbed by a powerful-looking shade, the Shadow Lord. He has Yona captive and begins to summon more shades. Then we see that Weiss is transported to an ethereal area with another book that looks similar to him. This is Grimoire Noir, who tells him that their purpose is to serve the Shadow Lord. This seems to jog some of Weiss's memories. He seems to succumb to the influence of the Shadow Lord and Noir for a moment, but the voices of his companions rouse something in him.
It's okay. I'll understand. I'll understand if you forget us. But I promise I won't forget you. I'll remember you, no matter what. I'll keep the memory of Grimoire Weiss alive forever. And that's not all I'll do. You hear me? I'll chase you till the end of time, and I'll bring you back to us. So Weiss, please come back!
Damn it, we need to stop him! If we don't do something, that black book will absorb Weiss!
Black. White. Black. White.
Images of black and white, the black and white of the books, the good and evil of the battle that is being fought. Weiss manages to shake this possession and overcome the power of the Shadow Lord. We fight Noir in a boss battle, but Weiss is about to be stabbed, and Nier jumps in front of the spell. Noir tells them that they will understand in time, and the group flies away with Yona in tow. Our heroes can do nothing to stop them. But there's still the matter of the giant shade that Kaine is blocking from entering the library. She realizes that this is her time, this is her purpose. The shade is too strong for them to defeat. They only have one option. Emil has to petrify Kaine, blocking the door off forever and sealing the shade inside. Emil resists this, but ultimately makes the tough decision. I really enjoy this whole sequence. Throughout the course of the game, it's only felt like we were making progress, but we never had a real goal. The goal so far was to cure Yona, and sure, we had an idea of how to save her and an idea of who our bad guy was, but this gives the group true purpose. They know that they have to defeat the Shadow Lord and Grimoire Noir and save Yona, but the group is also given motivation. This loss is huge for them. Kaine is now gone. She's not a part of the group anymore, and anytime that Nier has to visit Popola, the reminder of Kaine's absence stares him in the face. Emil had to use his power to do this, making him feel like he had to kill one of his own friends. Nier's failure to save his sister has affected him greatly in the years after this, causing him to lose his youthful, upbeat optimism and take on a jaded view of the world. Not only that, but he is now utterly convinced that shades are meant to be exterminated, incredibly evil beasts that are only there to be killed. The game picks up 5 years later, and Nier has grown. With this, gameplay has also greatly changed. We can now use 2 extra weapon types, two-handed swords and spears. The daggers that we've currently been using are fast weapons with a middle range. Two-handed swords generally have a longer range, deal much more damage, and are slower. The spears have a longer range and deal a decent amount of damage depending on which one we use. For this playthrough, I mostly found use in daggers and two-handed swords. I didn't use spears very much until one of the final battles. This just lent itself closer to my playstyle. The time skip really does change combat overall too, though, because Shades have now upgraded their abilities as well. Some of them have stronger armor, requiring us to break through their defenses before we can deal damage to them. This is easier done with two-handed swords than anything else. We will also have to maneuver around enemies to be able to defeat them. It is a wildly different change to combat and actually adds some complexity and challenge to the second half of the game. We save a nearby woman who was being attacked by Shades. Nier then fills us in on the last 5 years. The world is dying even faster than before. The Shades and the Black Scrawl are killing off everyone. Nier has spent the last 5 years looking for his sister, but it has led to nothing. This again has created a much darker and more blunt protagonist who now doesn't even know if this journey will ever end, if he will ever succeed in his goal. His resolute demeanor is still there though, just presented in a different way. We end up heading to Popola. She has a letter from Emil who says that he may have a lead on getting Kaine out of her petrification. We head over to the mansion and Emil hasn't aged at all. Apparently he just doesn't age for whatever reason. He found a document in the mansion that mentions a room beneath the house that will cancel all forms of magic. He thinks he may be able to harness this and stop Kaine's petrification. In the courtyard, we find an entrance to an underground facility of sorts located beneath the mansion. Down here, there are quite a lot of shades, but most of the technology seems to be more modern than we're used to. Emil also seems to negatively react to the place as soon as he gets there. Venturing through the place, we have to find different keycards to access the next areas. We find a discarded document talking about Number 6, a weapon that this facility was working on. It was the top priority for the research facility. Further in, we find another document stating that Number 6 needs to be stored, and the team wants to know the progress on Number 7. They also decided to disguise the upper part of the facility as a mansion. Emil is clearly pictured below, and he begins to get worse as his headaches increase. Halua was the name of the donor body used for Number 6, and Emil also seemed to be a donor body for Number 7. At this point, Emil realizes that he is some sort of weapon, but he can't remember anything. Nier tells him that he will support him no matter what. His past doesn't matter to the group. We reach the final room of the facility and find a massive beast chained and nailed to the wall. Emil then has flashbacks to his time in this place with his sister, Halua. They were regular kids before they came here. The research facility used magic to experiment on them and create the perfect weapon, Number 6, Emil's sister. They lost control of Number 6 and create Emil to petrify and seal it away. Nier doesn't see Emil as a weapon, he's just Emil. Emil realizes that he needs his sister's power to get rid of Kaine's petrification. He makes Nier promise that if Emil loses himself, then he will end his life to ensure he doesn't hurt anyone. Emil is swallowed up and we have to defeat Number 6. Another very easy fight here where we mostly just avoid the projectiles and continually fire ranged attacks. Once we pin the beast down, we see Emil in a dream. He sees his sister and says she'll always watch over him. Then Emil shows up. He thinks he can control his abilities now. He reveals his new form, warped once he took on his new powers, a massive head with skeletal arms and legs. This moment is incredibly tragic. Emil hates the way he looks. Because of his new form, he thinks that people won't accept him, that he has no place in a world with his friends because he is lesser. But that's not the case. Nier is willing to accept him in any light. He'll always be his friend, no matter what.
Welcome back, Emil. You've been through a lot.
But my body... I can't stand to be with you when I look like this.
What'd I tell you? We're here for you, no matter what.
Even with this, he still hopes that Kaine isn't terrified when she looks at him. The group heads back to the library to try and reverse the spell. It works, and Kaine is brought back, but the shade is also released from its holding place, so we have to fight it once again. This time, though, we're a lot stronger and have the ability to take it down for good. The group gets Kaine to wake up. She recognizes Emil immediately, which takes him by surprise. This is another shock because he thinks that he looks so grotesque. There's no way someone could see him for who he really is, but Kaine does. She is also taken aback by Nier's new appearance. He brought her a lunar tear to replace the ones from her grandmother, which she takes as a massive show of respect and care.
Kaine waking from her long petrified sleep. Emil's unflagging kindness. Our reunion was a happy one, and we let it wash over us like rain. That is, until Devila and Popola had to go and ruin it all.
At this point, Devila and Popola tell the group that Emil and Kaine cannot stay in the village. They have to sleep outside because the townsfolk are scared of them. Nier does not agree with this. He can't just let his friends sleep outside. Emil understands. He knows why people would be scared of him, and Kaine is used to sleeping outside, so they go willingly. Nier feels selfish because he never once thought about the situation of his friends, but he ultimately understands the twins' reasoning and apologizes to them the next day. Popola seems to think the Shadow Lord is connected to the lost shrine somehow. Since the canal has now opened up, the boat can take us back to the entrance of the lost shrine. This boat actually acts as a fast travel system of sorts. It won't let us travel to very specific areas like the desert travel point. Will still require some walking to get to Facade, but it gets us closer than before and reduces quite a bit of walking/rolling time. Heading through the lost shrine, we take a similar path as before to get to the top. This time, though, we have to complete some box puzzles to get through the rooms. On the way to the roof, Nier tells the group that he's going to stay outside with them from now on. He doesn't think it's right that they can't sleep in the village, so he doesn't want to either. When we get to the roof, we come back to the same room where we saved Yona in the beginning of the game. The shade that we took out before is there, and it seems like he wants revenge. We have to fight him again, also fighting shades while he protects himself. Eventually, we take him down, and Kaine gets impaled by a spear. Her skin begins to crawl with the letters, and she fully transforms into a shade. We have to take her down without killing her. We seem to have stopped it for now. Emil tells Kaine how he really feels. He needs her. He can't let her go.
Kaine!
Kaine!
I couldn't hold it back. I can't be with...
We're always going to be together, Kaine. If you transform again, we'll just stop it again. As many times as it takes. I like sleeping outside because I'm with you, Kaine. I'm able to ignore my appearance and keep going because of you. I'm weak, and I'm sad, and I'm lonely, but you make me strong.
With that, we find some sort of fragment by the altar. We take this back to Popola, who tells us that it's part of a larger key that may have something to do with the Shadow Lord. We have to find 4 others. The Law of Robotics and the Memory Tree clearly refer to the Junk Heap and Forest of Myth. From here, we can choose where to go. I chose the Junk Heap first. When we get there, we see a flashback of the 2 brothers scouring the place for materials. A robot approaches them, though, and after Gideon trips on a pipe, the place collapses, causing Jacob to be killed. Gideon has gone through a similar transition as Nier, though he's gone a bit further. He wants nothing but to destroy robots. He's grown jaded and callous in these last 5 years. He only lives for revenge now. He gives us a weapon that we can use, but he needs to repair it with a memory alloy. We get one inside from defeating Shades. We have to head all the way back through, which is something we're going to have to get used to. Once we get the alloy, Gideon says that he'll send a letter once the weapon is ready. We decide to head back to Popola, and she needs us to check on her ferryman again. He's been skipping out on work. He's nowhere to be found, but our search eventually leads us down to the beach where a ship has been wrecked. Inside, we have a side-scrolling section where we investigate the vessel. There's evidence that the ship was used to transport slaves. We also encounter a ghost-like girl that's wandering the place. We find a red bag on the ship, which doesn't spell good for the ferryman. Towards the end, we find a massacre underneath the floorboards, bodies piled up inside the boat. We then find the girl, and the postman arrives. The girl then turns into a shade, a massive one that we have to fight on the deck of the ship. We have to destroy both of its tentacles. When on the ground, we stop all manner of attacks and try to do as much damage as we can. It seems that the postman and this girl had some sort of friendship. Kaine exploits this weakness, and this allows Emil to deal a blow to the beast. We cut the beast in half, but it puts itself back together. There's a timer that we have to destroy, but we don't have the strength to do it. The group is about to be defeated when the postman starts attacking the girl. This stops her and distracts her for a moment. This is just enough time for Nier to finish her off. Afterwards, the red bag woman shows up, and we have to tell her the bad news about her husband. At this point, the King of Facade invites us to his wedding. He's getting married, and he wants the group to be there. We head to the desert town where the king reveals that his wife is to be Fira, the girl we met all those years ago. In true character, Kaine is not excited for the wedding, and Emil is overly excited. The next day, the king is married, but during the ceremony, wolves attack. They're led by a larger shade wolf, who we now have to fend off before he runs away. In the process of this attack, Fira was killed. This sends the king into a rage. He's ready to get revenge on the wolves and take them out for good. We end up assisting him and defeat the wolves in their den. With this, we gain the Loyal Cerberus fragment. We end up getting a letter saying that our weapon is done, so we return to Gideon. He tells us that there is a shade and a robot working together in the junk heap, so the group decides to take them out. Once again, we have to journey through the heap and fight the robot in its lair. It seems like the shade is giving orders to the robot, and the thing even tries to escape halfway through the fight when it begins to air her out. Gideon arrives and begins kicking the dead robot, laughing maniacally. In my opinion, this moment is a time for Nier to see a reflection of who he has become, or what he will become if he keeps down this path. This is clearly a much worse off version of him, someone who has gone so far for revenge and has grown massive amounts of hatred for shades, or robots in this case. This gives us the Law of Robotics key fragment and only leaves one more place for us to visit, the Forest of Myth. Here, the mayor tells us that he feels a strange presence at the Divine Tree. This is a tree at the heart of the village. When we investigate the tree, we get another text adventure. It tells us that it once remembered everything about the world. This was its reason for existing. He shows us some of these memories. A memory of a boy falling sick and succumbing to illness. He meets a woman that changes his world before he passes. Another of these memories is about a female warrior who lives for battle. Her comrades have fallen around her, and she is the only one left. She too falls to the beast. He tells us of one final memory, one that he can't fully recall, a memory of a red dragon falling from the heavens, but this one has been lost. If you're familiar with the first Drakengard, you'll know what this is a reference to. The tree's memories have begun to fade, though. We end up encountering a shade that can speak, that has sentience. The trees ask us to recall details about the memories he spoke to us, and then he asks us one final question. What is the most important thing in the world? All three answers are correct. With this, we gain the key fragment for this area. We have one last fragment to obtain, and when we talk to Popola, she tells us that the area has finally decided to open itself up to the other villages. They are finally willing to trade and have opened shops. In addition to this, a villager may know what sacrifice the last key fragment's name is in reference to. When we get there, we find shops open on the main platform, and we speak to one of the guards there. When we tell him that our goal is to kill all the shades, he begins to transform into a shade himself. Half the village does this at this point, and the place is attacked. We have a battle with a massive circle-shaped shade. As we move across platforms, a child sees his sister fall to the shades. He then accuses us of being the monsters. But we couldn't be monsters, right? We have to target the shade's center to defeat it. Emil distracts it while we circle around back. The shade proves far too powerful though, and to defeat the shade, Emil goes nuclear, unable to fully control the power that he harnesses. This completely decimates the area. The town is fully wiped out, not a soul left in sight, only a massive crater standing where it once was. Emil weeps for the town, cries for what he has done. He feels the weight, the guilt, the burden of the lives that he has taken at this point. But Nier thinks this was for the greater good. They can't look back. With this, we have all the keys we need, and can head to the Lost Shrine once again. There are a lot more shades here than before, and once we get to the top, we find a portal at the altar. We enter this portal and are transported to the Shadow Lord's castle. Once we reach the place, we are confronted with questions from two birds. This acts as sort of a password to the place. Why did humans disappear from the world? Because of a black disease. How can humans extend their lives? By separating body from soul. What is the destination of souls? They are placed in their corresponding shells. With this, we enter the next room and find a very unexpected sight. Devila and Popola are already here. They tell us to turn back, that we shouldn't be here. They were working with the Shadow Lord all along. They were the origins of the very power that we use. This is a massive betrayal to Nier. Not only were Devila and Popola his friends, they were basically his parents. Nier had nothing as a child and has always had to fend for himself, for him and Yona. Devila and Popola were there. They were a support network, something to fall back on, a net in case they failed. This is the worst thing that could happen to Nier, that someone would side with the people that stole his sister from him. I think this betrayal, though, also goes along with the theme of growing. As Nier grows in character throughout the story, he loses his innocence. This is the final step in that, the final loss that leads him away from childhood. After we defeat the pair, they get away and we're told that the answers to our questions lie inside the castle. Weiss begins to malfunction at this point. His speech is distorted and something is clearly wrong. We find a ballroom nearby enough to defeat tons of shades. More of the circular shades show up and we destroy them before we're attacked by a massive boar. We can take this thing out, but it just keeps regenerating. It chases us upstairs and we fight it once more. Then the guard from Facade shows up, led by the king himself. The group decides to distract the boar while we head forward, something Nier definitely doesn't want to do. We encounter Devila and Popola once again. They give us some exposition to explain themselves. 1300 years ago, humanity was on the brink of extinction and began research into Project Gestalt. We are shown flashing documents. Then the big reveal. We aren't human. No one in the room currently is human. The only humans left are now called Shades. The twins serve the true humans. This ultimately comes down to a difference of motives for them. We begin our final battle with them. The twins fight independently, with one attacking from the stage and the other attacking on the ground. We defeat Devila and Popola rushes to her side. Devila says that the two are twins because they were born without souls, the world too lonely for one without a soul. They are two parts of the same. They are one. With that, Popola's other half dies, and she's angry. We have another battle against her as she spits out a constant stream of projectiles. She then goes nuclear, destroying the bridge nearby. Emil sends the group up high in a protective bubble. Emil explains himself. He has always hated something about himself, but now he's proud of who he is. In one of the most tearful scenes in the game, Emil sacrifices himself.
No! Now get going, okay?
Emil.
Don't worry about me. I'm gonna be fine.
Emil! Emil!
Emil, you jackass, get back here!
Oh dear. Kaine's so unstable, and Vice can't stop arguing with people. I hope they can hold it together once I'm gone. Well, I guess they'll just have to learn. I want to see you again. I want to see all of you again. Just one more time. I'm scared. I don't want to die.
The weapon has turned into a protector. We see the Shadow Lord looking over Yona, and we see the aftermath and the grief in Kaine after Emil's death. From here, we can actually view the documents that we saw flashing on the screen before the fight with the twins. This will explain quite a bit, and I'm not going to get into the entire backstory or timeline right now. I'll be saving that for later when we talk about all of the supplementary material and the full timeline in the series retrospective. A brief cliff notes, though, is that humanity was facing a battle against a disease called WCS, or White Chlorination Syndrome. This began in 2003 after the battle with the Queen in Ending E of Drakengard. Project Gestalt was created to separate human souls from their bodies. The two would be reunited once WCS went away. Bodies were created for the humans from their genetic data. These were called replicants. The souls left from the humans were called gestalts. The first and original gestalt was the Shadow Lord himself. Gestalts can have something called relapse, which is when they reject their replicants. This causes the black scrawl disease to appear in those replicants and causes the gestalt to become hostile. The original plan was once WCS was gone from the world, Grimoire Vice and Nier would be used to fuse Gestalt and Replicant, creating true humans again and reuniting their souls to their bodies. But clearly this plan did not work out. Nier makes his way through the castle and arrives at the Shadow Lord's chambers. We have to fight Grimoire Noir, a very simple battle that resembles the fight we had in the library of the mansion. Once we face him, we face the Shadow Lord himself. He moves very quickly and attacks from all angles, sky, ground, ranged, melee. We have to avoid his attacks and get in damage when he's open. After this, Yona is awake and calls out to her brother, but ends up heading to the Shadow Lord instead of Nier. She says she doesn't want to do this. It seems there are two voices inside Yona, and our Yona wants to see Nier. Shadow Lord's Yona tries to convince him to stop, that this isn't right, and she can't see him anymore. Yona puts herself into the sunlight, and it seems that the shade that possessed her sacrificed herself, fading off into the sunlight. We have another battle against the Shadow Lord that is mostly similar to the last. Vice begins to malfunction. He has enough energy left, though, to stop the Shadow Lord. He decides to sacrifice himself as well to complete Nier's journey. He heads off and gives us a chance to take out the Shadow Lord. With this, we finally defeat him. There's a wisp of Vice left. His voice still remains. We need to call Yona back to tell her that we're still here and that our lives still have meaning. She begins to ask us what her favorite things are. And then her final question. Who does she love more than anyone? We have to input the name of our save file here. This is one of the things that Nier does best. It's metagame, and I'd like to talk about this for a bit. At the beginning of Nier, we are asked to put in our name. This at first is an innocuous choice. We don't think anything of it. Most will put their own name or the name they normally use for games like this, but Nier isn't a blank slate character RPG. We aren't going to be creating a personality here and applying it to the character that we're playing. We're playing an established character, but we are meant to supplant ourselves in their shoes. This isn't the first time a game has done something like this, but the game takes this a step further. It asks us to make choices in its world, mostly around telling the truth. When met with these crossroads in the world, we're asked whether we should deliver the hard news to the person or not. This choice is incredibly important because we are being lied to about the world currently, and we don't know it yet. This is not to say that Nier is being lied to about the world, but the player is as well. We will see both options in the end, but in this first run-through, we have no idea what's actually going on. On top of that, our goals and motivations line up with the character that we're currently playing. During the first part of that game, we want to cure Yona. Most of us will naturally care for her character, seeing a sick and innocent young woman be so conflicted with being forced to stay bedridden and be helped by those around her makes us only want to care for her more. When she is stolen away before part 2, we, along with Nier, become jaded and want to take out every shade to get her back. The idea that we may have failed at our journey in a game where it seems like we have been succeeding is not something that we want to face. In the end, we aren't a new character that we've supplanted our own personality onto, or even a fantasy personality. We are the protagonist, and we naturally align with him as much as we can. So when this question pops up, who do I love more than anyone? It hits like a freight train. This impact is only hardened by the fact that we just recently learned that this whole thing, the whole journey to find Yona, might not exactly be the best thing for the world, and we may have done wrong on our way to get here. When we input this name, Yona awakens. She sees her brother and stands up. The siblings reunite, and Kaine heads off to leave. Nier offers for her to stay with them, but she knows this is never possible. She's possessed. There's a shade inside of her. The two stare out at the sky, and Yona reflects on the voice that she heard before, of the shade wanting to see light. We then see a flashback of the two out in the grass, as Nier gives Yona a lunar tear. The two children are happy to be together in the sun, in the sky. We then see the Shadow Lord and his sister reunited as well. The first playthrough and ending of Nier is fantastic. It drip feeds us enough information to keep us interested. It tells us a story through its dialogue and cutscenes. But in the background, another story is brewing, another one unseen. We can feel it, and we even get hints of it throughout our journey. We know that something here isn't right, and as we make our way to saving the princess, we get the feeling that maybe we're doing something wrong. But even just as a story on its own, Nier succeeds in telling an incredibly emotionally deep tale about a group of troubled adventurers trying to find their way. Nier, our protagonist, starts out as a starry-eyed boy who wants nothing more than to take care of his sick sister. He will do anything to meet this goal and spends most of his days completing tasks for others to make this a reality. When Yona is stolen, though, he feels like a failure. For this first time in his life, he really knows what it's like to miss the mark. This creates a change in him, and spending the next 5 years looking for her, only to have that hope and optimism slowly fade away with time, creates someone who is jaded and quiet. He becomes angry at the Shades, and is on less of a journey to save his sister, and more of one to murder every being that he deems evil in his presence. This journey comes full circle when he is betrayed by his family, the only family that he's ever known. He realizes that the life he's been living is a lie, and this all happens right before he is about to meet his goal. Imagine climbing a mountain, dreaming of reaching the top, spending weeks imagining what it will be like to stand on the peak, only to be told mere seconds before you arrive that the mountain is a living being, and with every step taken, you have caused it pain. You're seconds away from the top, so why not complete your goal? But the journey will have been lessened by this revelation. Kaine and Emil both have their own tragic tales, ones of loss, revenge, hatred, forgiveness, and acceptance. But like I said before, the first playthrough of Nier is really only half of the story. What we just saw was ending A of the game, but I really only consider this the halfway point of the experience. So let's talk about the other endings, shall we? Beating Nier for the first time will unlock ending B, which will allow us to experience Kaine's side of the story. Now, I do have one big qualm with this route, even though I think it's probably the best route in the game. I think we should have actually played Kaine during this playthrough. This whole route adds another element that we'll get into in a moment, but it's an element that Kaine has been experiencing the whole time. This drastically changes the story when we look at it from her perspective, and it makes us completely reevaluate the tale when we look at it through her eyes. Because of this, it really would have made more sense for us to play this route with her, experiencing the story through her eyes fully. I can understand why the original game didn't include it, but I really wish the remake would have. There's already a section later in the game where we play as her, so it would have just made sense for this version of the game. This route is actually not an alternate ending, but the same story and ending as before, but with different context. That being said, we begin this route where all routes will begin after A, from the moment that Kaine is taken out of her petrification. Here, Kaine doesn't immediately wake up. We begin seeing text appear on the screen. Kaine's full backstory is presented to us. This novella takes place when Kaine was still a child in the Eyrie. She was ostracized from the community and bullied by a lot of the people there. Demo, a local bully, would band together with others and throw rocks at her. The reason she was ostracized is because she was made different than everyone else. She was born both male and female, and for this, the community looked down on her. The only person she has in her life is her grandmother. She protects her, takes care of her, and tries to raise her well. At first, their relationship is rocky, with her grandmother acting quite a lot like the Kaine we know does. But over time, the two grow to bond and butt heads less. As time goes on, Kaine's grandmother begins to show her age, though, and it becomes more difficult for her to complete the daily tasks that the two need to survive. Kaine has to travel to town for her and meets an apothecary who treats her with kindness. She draws a portrait of her grandmother so that she'll always live on. One day, Kaine goes to get some rocks and some fruits, and when she comes back, her grandmother has been attacked by a shade. She is killed during the exchange, and Kaine is brought to the brink of death. She is then possessed by a shade named Tehran. He is vindictive and feeds on hate and fear. He can give her the power to survive this ordeal, but he'll be forever in her mind, feeding off the killing that she does, whether shade or human. This reveals many things about Kaine. First is that her vulgar and standoffish nature result from her being raised by her grandmother. She took those traits on from her because she was the only person in her life that she respected, and the only one that cared for her. She also keeps people at a distance because she could never trust anyone in her childhood. Everyone was trying to run her away and keep her out. This explains a lot about her personality and how she got to be here. But Tehran is an incredibly important part of this next playthrough. Since we'll be seeing the story through Kaine's eyes, we will now be able to hear shades talk. This is because Tehran is in Kaine's mind, therefore Kaine can hear what they say. This doesn't mean Emil, Weiss, or Nier are privy to this information, but we, the player, are, and it greatly changes how we view the story. Other small moments will be recontextualized as well, like when Nier gives Kaine a lunar tear after she is awoken. This clearly means a lot more than we originally thought, and Kaine having a group of people around her that genuinely care for her no matter what is everything. We also immediately come to the issue of the group sleeping outside. It means a lot more now that Nier realizes Kaine has always slept outside. Before we thought of this as just our protagonist caring for her, but now we realize that Kaine sleeping outside doesn't mean lack of comfort, it means being ostracized from society, from community, from family. We then see a new scene with Emil and Kaine camping. Kaine opens up a bit to Emil, and Emil is dedicated to finding a cure for both Kaine's possession and Emil's new look. I should note here that with this second playthrough, we now have access to the diary of Nier's mother. This is called the Diary of the Recycled Vessel, and was something that was added for the Replicant remaster. Here we play through short combat sequences as Father Nier, the one from the Western version of the game. We can get a few weapons as rewards for playing through these fights. There's also some brief and interesting references to the Drakengard series as well. During the second playthrough, we go through the story just as we did the last time. We have to head to the Lost Shrine to search for a remnant of the Shadow Lord. This time, though, we see flashbacks from the bosses that we're about to fight. Gretel, the surviving statue from our first encounter here, is grieving over the loss of their companion. The shades nearby, who are defective gestalts, end up growing a bond with Gretel. Gretel swears to protect them, and of course, we attack. Our perception of this fight now changes, as Gretel is really only here to protect the ones that they care for, something that Nier is doing as well. During this fight, Gretel screams out repeatedly to stop killing his friends, to not do this, and suddenly we feel like the invaders here. We kill Gretel and Kaine goes berserk once again. In addition to hearing the Shade's voices, we now also hear Tehran constantly berating Kaine. He's begging her to kill everything around her, to kill and to feed his lusts. With this, we grab the first key fragment and retrace our steps to grab the others. When we arrive at the junk heap, we see a flashback to a Shade and its mother. They're trapped in the junk heap and people are coming after them. The mother sacrifices themselves to save their child. The child weeps alone in a room, lost by themselves. Just then, a robot arrives, P-33. The robot is about to eliminate the intruder when it realizes that its creator is also dead. It has something in common with the Shade. It takes pity on him. The two become friends, and when Gideon and Jacob are ransacking the place, Jacob dies after Gideon trips on a pipe. We see that the structure collapsed because of the intruders. The P-33 and his friend never wanted to harm the boys. We then journey through the junk heap to find another memory alloy. We see P-33 and the Shade spending time together. They dream of leaving the place, seeing the outside world, living a life together. After Gideon has completed our weapon, we return here to seek out the robot Shade team themselves. This time, though, of course, we can hear the two speaking during the battle. At first, it isn't bad, but as the two realize they are losing, the Shade tells P-33 to leave and get out of here. P-33 promises to protect the Shade, and the two try and escape during the battle. They want to see the outside world, like they promised each other, but they can't get away. This is worsened when the Shade jumps off of P-33 and we murder him. This battle turns from a boss fight into a massacre. We head to the Forest of Myth as usual, but not much is different here with seeing it from Kaine's perspective. We head to the Eyrie and have our boss fight with the Shade that's attacking the place. Emil wipes out the village and we then see his story, his thoughts and feelings. This story tells of how Emil was treated in the labs, how he was handled by the assistants and shown no care or worth. They were scared of him and treated him as a delicate weapon rather than a real human. It also shows when Emil petrifies his sister to try and stop her from causing any more damage. It wasn't something that he wanted to do, but something that he had to do. This causes Emil to see his sister's memories, remembering the life that they had together. This reinforces the belief that Emil holds, that he is a weapon, that he is made to destroy. We then head to Seafront to look for the ferryman. Here we see flashbacks to the wrecked ship when the postman first met the girl inside. He wasn't yet aware that she was a Shade, he just thought she was lost and scared. He began to feed her and take care of her as his own. He even taught her to sing, bonding over something with her. Before we reach her, we see Louise alone. She has grown to care for the man and wants to stay human, but she's slowly changing into a Shade. She thinks if she can eat more people, then she will stay human. Of course, we end up fighting her, and we hear her begging to be human throughout the ordeal. The postman arrives, and it becomes clear why she was distracted. She doesn't understand, though. She wanted to be with him, and he taught her to sing. She's just doing what she showed him to do. Louise, like Emil, reflects on her hideous form, a lack of perfection present in her eyes. We then see Kaine with a letter that Louise wrote for the postman. She tears the letter up, though, while Tehran belittles her. We have one more key left to retrieve, in the desert. When we head there, we see the main wolf talking to his brothers. The desert used to be a massive lush and green forest, but now it has become a wasteland due to the human invasion. Before the wedding, the guards hunt down the wolves and slaughter them at their den so that there isn't an intervention during the ceremony. This act of violence, of course, causes the very death that they were trying to prevent. The wolf is sick of seeing his kin slaughtered like this and kills Fira at the wedding. The wolves are low in numbers after the attack and decide to stand their ground, dying with honor rather than escaping. When we kill the wolves, they wonder what they did to deserve such a fate. We then see the wolf thinking of a man, one that took care of him, someone that he called friend. We then head back to the village, and Nier says that he wants to leave Emil and Kaine behind. He thinks it would be too dangerous and that they might die in the process. He wants to spare them this, but they aren't having it. They want to stand by their friend and rescue his sister. We finally head to the Lost Shrine and make our way into the Shadow Lord's castle. We fight Devila and Popola and head into the ballroom. Here the Shades are making their last stand to protect their sanctuary. They fight for their home, and when the door opens and the Ball Shades flood in, we realize that these are children. The other Shades beg us to stop, beg us to end the senseless murder, but we don't listen. We can't even listen. Then the boar shows up. He is angry, frustrated that we've slaughtered so many, that their cause will die here. This is when Kaine confronts Tehran. She tells him that he's hiding his insecurities under violence and hate, that they are both the same. This is Kaine contending with herself, making peace with her own faults. The King of Facade then sacrifices himself to let us go on. Events mostly proceed the same until the final fights. Tehran has noticed a change in Kaine. He realizes that she's doing this for him, for us, for Nier. She pledges her sword for him once more. This time the Shadow Lord begs his sister to stop what she's doing, to stop her sacrifice for these people. He grieves his sister, and in his last moments, he finds peace that he will soon join her. We then see him weeping in a white space. He weeps for his failure, and that he only brought his sister pain all these years. We then jump back to the first scene from the game, playing as the original humans that would become the Shadow Lord and Yona. She tries to convince him to share a cookie with her. We then see the two reunited in something of an afterlife, as they originally were. After the credits, we see an odd scene. Emil's head bounces through the deserts. He ended up transferring to his sister's body, but only has a head now. He needs to find a new body, and he rolls off into the sand. The second playthrough of Nier is fantastic, and is really what took this game from something great to an untouchable piece of art. It's an amazing work, and seeing the story again, but through the eyes of those we fought, gives us a completely different perspective. It fulfills that goal that Yoko Taro was trying to meet. Seeing this from the perspectives of the enemies makes us consider the fact that we might be the villains here. Everyone we killed have had families, lives, children, parents. They had their own reasons and motivations for fighting, their own reasons to battle us. They weren't mindless beings, they were souls. The Shadow Lord himself is a perfect example. He is a parallel of Nier because he is the Gestalt version of him. He wants the exact same thing that Nier does, to save his sister. He fights for the same reason and does things for the same reason, yet we call him our enemy. Perhaps the most moving of the fights is the one with P-33. Seeing the young Shade bond with the robot over time, seeing their relationship develop, seeing these two innocents scorned by the world come together to develop a friendship, only to then have Gideon blame his brother's death on them. Gideon was truly the one that caused his brother to perish, but he takes it out on these innocents. We then act as his sword because it furthers our goal of rescuing Yona. They are slaughtered in the junk heap as they try to escape and beg for their lives. They only wanted to be together, to see the outside world, and they never got the chance because of us. There really isn't a lot of new stuff included in the playthroughs to get ending C and D, which is why I'm lumping them together here. These are the first routes and endings that we will encounter that are actually different endings, alternate to paths A and B, which were the same story, just told differently. There are some slight additional dialogue here and there, but for the most part, the ending is different, and that's it. We get 2 extra sequences throughout the story. We do have to obtain all 33 weapons in the game before we can witness Ending C. This actually really isn't that much of a chore. It's a staple in Yoko Taro games to hide certain endings behind obtaining all the weapons, but this one is probably the easiest to do it in. Most of the weapons are found in the world, bought from stores, rewards from side quests, or earned through the story. There are a couple that are locked behind the recycled world challenges, but they aren't that difficult. The gameplay is mostly the same as our second playthrough, up until the seafront section. We fight the boss the same as before, but now during the section where we couldn't beat the timer, we're powerful enough to be able to complete this. We end up running up the side of the boss and defeating it head on. We then see Kaine give the letter from Louise to the postman afterwards. It affects him in a way that he can't understand. Even after realizing she was a killer and a monster, he can't stop thinking about her. We then collect all of the fragments just as before. This is the part of the game that will become a slog for most people because we're really repeating a lot of content. You can actually skip most scenes at this point, and especially on the 4th playthrough to make it go a little faster. You can really get the method down pretty quickly as well and make this only take a few hours. When we finally reach the Shadow Lord's castle and defeat Devila and Popola, we see a new text memory from Emil. He recalls being with his sister, and the only woman that took care of them when they were in the facility. He recalls the good times and birthdays and the snacks. He then talks to Halua after his sacrifice, and she offers him her body so that he can go on living for the both of them. This is assumingly how Emil got to be the disembodied head at the end of Ending B. We once again fight the Shadow Lord and defeat him. Kaine then begins to succumb to the Shade possession. Tehran begins to feel the emptiness of the killing that he and Kaine took part in. She's started to rub off on him. We then talk to her, and she's about to go berserk. With Emil gone, there's no one to stop her. She asks us to take her life before it comes to that. We have to fight her, or really just avoid her attacks for a period. Tehran fully takes over, and we have to battle Kaine. He tells us that there is a way to save her life, but we'll have to make a tough decision. Tehran will take control and pin her down, and we have to stab her in the heart. After we defeat her, Tehran tells us that we can free Kaine by killing her, give her the peace of death and stop her existence. or we can return her to being a normal human again, but in this, we have to sacrifice ourselves. Ending C takes place when we choose to free Kaine from her burden. She is killed, and Nier kisses her as she fades from this world. Tehran tells Nier that she is truly free. He knows her better than anyone. Nier reflects on Kaine as he holds a lunar tear in his hands. Ending D is the other choice that we can make. This is really the last ending that we can get in the original game, and is the true ending to the story. Here we choose to sacrifice our own existence to return Kaine to her mortal life. Everyone will forget Nier. All memory of him will be wiped from existence. The game asks us 4 times if we're sure when we make this choice. We then have to input the name of our character. We slowly watch as every single thing from our menu fades away. Every item that we picked up, every word we collected, every weapon, document, tutorial, map, everything. It all goes away as the world forgets about us. Our save data is erased, and Kaine wakes up beside Yona as she thanks the woman for saving her. Kaine thinks that something is certainly off, but she can't place what. With this, the menu changes, and we only have one more ending to talk about. This ending was actually introduced with the remaster. This was originally published as a short story called The Lost World in Grimoire Nier, a strategy and world guide published for the game. Here we have to start back from the beginning of the game with a new character name. We can't input our old one. This is a fresh start. We play through part 1 of the game completely normally, rescuing Yona, meeting Kaine, heading to the junk heap, helping the lighthouse lady, and eventually defending the Aerie from the shade that killed Kaine's grandmother. When Kaine fades and the group tries to wake her up, we realize this is a dream that she's having of the adventures with her friends. It's been 3 years since she saved Yona after ending D, and she's been plagued by these nightmares. She thought this was the end, but the Shades left after the Shadow Lord's death have begun to attack replicants to try and get their bodies back. She heads out to kill some Shades and finds a guard that's in danger. He was trying to make his way to the Forest of Myth because the village has lost contact with them. Inside, we find the inhabitants dead, and robots are pouring out of the tree at its center. The tree opens up and we can head inside. Kaine has a slightly different moveset to that of Nier. We control her much the same though, and the only real difference is that we use the magic buttons to charge and upward attack. Voices begin to speak with us as we move further down the tree. This tree is really a machine that has been recording memories of the world. Inside we find 2 android-like children. Kaine kills them immediately, but they just reappear. They summon a large robot that we have to fight. It's a lot faster than the likes of P-33, but has similar attacks. The girl and boy say that they have been watching for a long time, the voice of a recycled world. They want to see Kaine's potential. They want entertainment. Kaine defeats the robot and heads deeper inside. There, they have recreated versions of Kaine at her best in battle. We have to defeat waves of them. Emil shows up when things begin to get dire. He now has 4 arms, but assists Kaine in opening up a path forward. They reveal a doorway inside. The children say that what is lost lies ahead. Inside, we find some sort of energy source and are transported deeper within. Memories that have been sealed away begin to appear as the enemies that we fought in the main game. We fight them, and finally Kaine's nemesis appears, the shade that she cannot escape. There's something she can't remember. Someone else was here fighting with them. Kaine ends up failing and falling to the assault of the Shades. Kaine is then back in the Aerie, reliving her horrors and warped versions of her memories. A voice then begins calling out to her to wake her up. It's Vice, who then assists in the battle. His magic helps us take down the beast, and the figures of children are shown the potential of replicants. Just then, memories of Nier begin flooding into her head. She calls him back. She wants to be his sword again. We approach Nier's body, and we're asked to, once again, recall the name of the first character we made. We slowly see as everything is restored. Our saves, our items, weapons, stats, everything is back. Kaine succeeded. We then see one final scene. A massive, large flower blooms over the land, and Kaine holds Nier in her arms. The camera pans out to show that the flower is a giant lunar tear. Now, I don't normally do this, but I do feel obligated to create a separate section for Nier's music. This is mostly because it has such critical acclaim, especially with the new arrangements for the Replicant remaster. It's also just because I love it so much, I feel like it deserves its own section. The entire soundtrack is beautiful. Both versions are a masterpiece of music and fit the entire game incredibly well. Every track and every sound amplifies the world, environments, and moments that we are experiencing. Its choral voices and orchestral instrumentation give the game a grand, illustrious feeling, as if we're hearing a tale about the far past told from someone in our time. It evokes the feeling of looking back. As we talked about with the development section, the entire thing is also dripping with sadness, a melancholic tone across the soundtrack that adds to the emotion that the game seeks to pull from the tale and the player. Now, I will say here, both soundtracks offer a different experience. I honestly can't and don't really want to choose which one I like more. In some cases, the updates and new arrangements of the remaster feel better, more clean, and evoke more emotion. But in other cases, the original soundtrack works much better, and its stripped-back feel lends to the song. Because of that, in certain cases, I will be talking about the original versions of these songs when I feel that they are better. The Wretched Automatons is one of those tracks that works much better in the original game. The song is a rhythmic, thumping track, introducing us slowly to the industrial sounds of a factory. The beat slowly progresses over the beginning of the song as new elements are introduced. When the chopped and modulated voices start coming through and the beating rhythms in the background come together to form an absolute groove, this thing hits its crescendo. The choral voices and beautiful singing only add to this track. I do think it works better in the original version of the soundtrack. Here it sounds much more stripped back and grimy, juxtaposing the industrial with the clean sound of the angelic voices. The new version sounds a little too clean overall. Snow in Summer is a song that I think works better in the remaster. Most of the voice-heavy tracks and more choral-feeling songs work a lot better in the new version of the game. This intro just sets the tone for the song, angelic voices lilting through. You can feel the voices drift down from heaven, a beautiful light streaming from above. When the rest of the track joins in, it begins its build and never stops until it hits a beautiful peak. This track is a gorgeous wonder, and its new version is stunningly impressive. Shadow Lord is another track that works very well with the remastered version. It's similar to the last track, but with a much more somber and dark feeling. We get the emotion of the character through the introduction, the pain of a long journey unfulfilled. The pain of loss and regret, sadness and worry. When the song builds in its center, we get the full scope of the final epic battle the character is about to fight. The drums in the background hit beautifully, and every time they are stressed, you can feel it in your bones. Emil's Sacrifice is one of the saddest songs on the entire soundtrack, and is one that, in my opinion, works better on the original OST. The newer version is much too clean and feels a lot more emotionless than the first track. The song opens with some beautiful instrumentation that gives you chills. But when the voices come through, you almost feel as if Emil himself is singing this song. It feels like a goodbye to friends, a parting thank you, a reflection on the journey. The vocals done by Emmy Evans here are just beautiful. The emotion is genuinely conveyed here wonderfully. You can feel it in every single word and note. This whole soundtrack is just fantastic. It is an absolute treat and a step above the rest. While both versions are amazing, you will be hard-pressed to find a song that does not impress on either of these. Nier is one of my favorite games of all time, and it's an experience that you can only truly have once. It tells a wonderful story just through the baseline playthrough. It weaves narratives and characters together in such a compelling way. The group that we travel through the game with all have their reasons for fighting, their reasons for being there. Some want acceptance, others want to be the hero, some just want to help. The characters are very well thought out, and their journeys build them up, not only changing them as time goes on, but revealing more about them that we didn't know. The game's meta elements also push through just the story and involve the player themselves. This forces the player to align with the character so that the things that the character feels are felt more deeply by the player. The player is therefore interwoven with the game from the very beginning. We aren't just along for the ride, we are in the driver's seat. Any bumps that come along the way are ours to solve, ours to contend with, ours to answer. But the second playthrough of the story and its second ending show a complete other side. It isn't just that this game has good characters and an interesting world and a well-crafted story. It suddenly changes. The game is now asking us difficult questions and making us feel uncomfortable. We don't want to do this. We suddenly don't want to kill these shades. When the bosses are begging to be spared and protecting their children, we just want it to stop. But suddenly we become disconnected from that character. We can't stop them. We have to just let it happen. These events have already played out. They are already written in history, carved in stone, and we can't change them. We have to live with being uncomfortable, with seeing the horrific actions that our characters are committing through others' eyes. This is to say, though, that the game delivers its point incredibly well. As Taro said before, he realized that you didn't need to be insane to kill. You just had to think you were right. Our characters think they are right, and through most of the story, we think they are right as well. We come out on the other side not really knowing what to think. We can see both sides of the situation and understand both points, but there really is no black or white. Everything is a true shade of gray, and in this case, no one is the victor. Both sides lose. Nier sold all right in Japan, with the Replicant version specifically selling 60,000 units in its first week and 121,000 units by the end of May 2010. Yoko Taro stated later that the game wasn't incredibly successful, but it wasn't a disaster either. The game received mixed reviews, with most outlets criticizing the visuals as being quite lackluster. The original game currently sits at a 68 on Metacritic for the PS3 version of the game. The remaster fared much better upon release, with the PS4 version getting a 84 on Metacritic and shipping over 1 million copies worldwide by June 2021. As we already know, after Nier, Yoko Taro would go on to make Drakengard 3. But after this, the director would then release his most critically acclaimed and best-selling game to date. But we'll talk about that next time. Bye, Dad.